What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about why Canadians don't really live in central Canada. And specifically, from what I can tell, it appears to be a massive part of northern Ontario. Now, I'm pretty sure that Ontario is the most populated Canadian province, right? So this video, this topic, caught me by surprise a little bit. And honestly, I just want to get to the bottom of this. So why do so few Canadians live in a huge area in the middle of Canada? Why is that? Let's find out. Let's take a look.
Canada's population is largely broken out into the eastern half and the western half of the country.
Oh, see, that already I didn't know. Well, I guess that's the whole point of this video. Why is that? Wait a minute, I didn't even know that. I know that a lot of Canada's population is, like, towards the south, towards the border, really. A massive majority of Canadians live, like, more south in Canada. But I didn't know about this west-east discrepancy as well.
But right in the middle is a large swath of land from the Hudson Bay to the Great Lakes, where very few Canadians live. So
What? Yeah, isn't this just like a giant part of Ontario, right? Like northern Ontario, right? What? Why is that?
why don't more people live in Canada's empty belt?
Empty belt. Okay. It's very random.
Welcome
It's very random to me, but intriguing at the same time.
to another episode. Today we're off to explore another region of Canada that I've termed Canada's empty belt, but is
Okay.
perhaps more officially known as Northern Ontario.
Yeah.
Because if you look just to the east and west of this region, there are some pretty dense settlements. But right here in the middle, very few Canadians call this place home.
Huh.
And as usual, there's a geographic reason for this.
Okay. Exploring Canada's empty belt.
Canada's empty belt is a vast region in the middle of the country that splits the dense urban clusters of eastern Canada with the less dense but still fairly populated provinces of western Canada.
Wow, I did not realize. Somehow highlighting it like this, like, I didn't realize how massive Ontario is. And Quebec, for that matter. Like, holy cow. And I also never even thought about, like, central Canada. It's weird. That's kind of one of the reasons I enjoy these sort of geography-centric videos. I never think about stuff like this.
It stretches from the Hudson Bay in the north down to the US border and Lake Superior and Lake Huron in the south. And this region is so interesting because, well, if you look at the population of Canada, in a similar vein as the United States empty belt, there are very few people living here, effectively splitting the country into two larger population bases.
Really? Wow. So, and funny enough, I think there's a super, like, sort of dense population of Canadians all packed into southern Ontario. Like, yeah, because Ontario is the most populated province, and not many of the people living there live in the north, apparently. So that's interesting. And also just the idea of this west and east Canada. I never thought of it like that.
And while I've termed this region Canada's empty belt, it's probably best known locally as Northern Ontario.
Right.
Northern Ontario is an expansive region characterized by a wealth of natural resources, breathtaking landscapes, and a hugely different environment from its southern counterpart.
Oh, is that what it is? Does this explain it? It's like a bunch of forest and water, and it's like tough to like make a settlement there? Is that it?
It's so different, in fact, that the way in which both regions of Ontario developed are almost directly contrasting with each other.
Really?
And at about 802,000 square kilometers, Northern Ontario accounts for nearly 90% of the land area of the province, but is home to just about
Right.
6% of its population.
6%? 6%? Man, if you have a house out in northern Ontario, your yard is probably like 700 square miles or something. Like 6% of the population is sharing 90% of the land? That's insane.
And the geography of this region of Canada plays a huge part in why so many Canadians live to the east and west of it, but not
Okay.
in it. One of the
Okay.
most defining features of Northern Ontario is the presence of the Canadian Shield, a geological
Right.
formation that encompasses Northern Ontario and much of Canada at large.
Oh, the Canadian Shield. Gosh, it's been a while. I've learned about this Canadian Shield at some point or another. It's like tough to whatever the material it's made out of. It's not very easy to grow in things on it, agriculture, or build or live basically on the Canadian Shield. Okay.
The presence of the Canadian Shield means that this area is rich in minerals, but very poor in soil quality.
Okay.
And
Good.
because of
Right.
this,
Right. Right.
the region has been mostly left alone with hundreds of undisturbed lakes, rivers, and a vast expanse of dense boreal forests. In fact,
Wow.
Northern Ontario by itself is home to about 700,000 square kilometers of forest, which would equate to about 2% of the entire planet's forest coverage.
Oh my God. There's just like, this is something as Americans we are just not aware of growing up. That so much of Canada, like the country as a whole, is unoccupied. Like, no one's living there. That I had absolutely no idea. Because I think, there's parts of America, like this narrator was saying, that are like less populated than others. But we're pretty well spread out, like living in all parts of the United States for the most part. But Canada, like, couldn't be more different. Like, the more north you get, it gets way less populated, way less livable. And apparently, there's just this giant honkin' space in northern Ontario as well. I didn't know about. Huh.
For a single province in a single country, that's a lot of trees. Further north lies the expansive Hudson Bay lowlands, a
Okay.
region that is predominantly covered by muskeg, a type of acidic wetland formed of waterlogged, decaying plant material known as peat.
Oh.
One of the most fascinating aspects of the Hudson Bay lowlands is its geologic history. The region was heavily impacted by glaciation during the last ice age. As the
Okay.
glaciers receded, they left behind a flat landscape with poor drainage, contributing to the formation of the extensive wetlands we see today.
Okay, so it's nothing that Canadians have against Northern Ontario. Don't feel bad, Northern Ontario. It's fine. It's really just like Mother Nature, natural history and geography that has just made it not very hospitable to living compared to other places.
Today, it serves as an important ecosystem with a variety of plants and wildlife that have adapted to its unique conditions. Black spruce, tamarack, and various types of mosses and lichens are common plant species,
Okay.
while the region serves as habitat for animals like moose,
Oh.
caribou, and a multitude of waterfowl.
Oh,
But
it
what
belongs to the moose. Northern Ontario. It is habitat. It does have a population. The moose call it home. Okay.
What's perhaps most interesting about the geography of Northern Ontario is just how much it directly contrasts with that of Southern Ontario.
Really?
The southern region of the province has been called the Golden Horseshoe of Canada for a reason.
Oh.
It has an incredible amount of fresh water provided by the Great Lakes, a booming metroplex region of about 10 million Canadians,
Right.
and a fairly temperate climate. By
Right.
contrast, Northern Ontario is almost the exact opposite in every way, aside from a similar
Really?
abundance of water.
Oh my God, that is so fascinating. I had no idea. Just like, I guess because it's all one province, I just don't think of it like, oh, how different could it be? Apparently, very, very different.
It's this exact contrasting geography that enabled many early British Canadian settlements to set up in southern Ontario, leaving northern Ontario very sparsely inhabited.
Huh.
Northern Ontario splits Canada in half. On the east side is where most Canadians live in the major cities of Toronto and Montreal. And on the west side is the smaller but still sizable cities of Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver.
Right.
But in the empty belt, very, very few Canadians.
I've never thought about Canada like that. That's really interesting. Why Canadians don't live in the empty
If
belt.
you haven't picked up on it yet, Canada's empty belt, more officially known as Northern Ontario, is not home to very many people. In fact, of the entirety of Canada's population, fewer than 800,000 people call this vast area home.
Wow. 800,000 compared to 38 million. That's roughly like 1/40th of the population.
Would be less than 2% of Canada's total population.
Wow.
And while it's easy to simply blame the cold, remember that the single city of Edmonton is home to approximately 1.5 million people, and is far more north than any of Northern Ontario's small cities.
Right, yeah. I would have blamed that pesky cold. Wouldn't be like, it's cold the more north you get. But he's absolutely right. There's provinces that are much more north than this. Is it really just all explained by, like, the inability to farm? Or I think it's because of the inability to grow things in the poor soil and it's cold. Early on in Canada's history, people just didn't want to use that land to create big metropolitan areas. So it's really like a result of the past. Canadians not really loving Northern Ontario. Sorry, Northern Ontario, but Canadians not really loving it and just going out to other places.
Suffice it to say, there are a number of reasons why Canadians don't live in this region specifically.
Okay.
Historically, the area was primarily the homeland of various indigenous peoples who had adapted to its challenging conditions. Meanwhile, early European settlers were less interested in these more remote areas and instead more attracted to the fertile lands in the south.
Yes, that makes sense. Oh, there's indigenous Canadians that were living there as well. Another piece to the puzzle. Okay.
Which were far more suitable for agriculture and easier to access. Eventually, after natural resources in the north were discovered, settlements did emerge.
Oh.
But they were far more focused on resource extraction like mining and logging rather than on building large, sustainable populations.
Ah, okay. So once people found out there was a little cheddar, little moolah, little money to be made in Northern Ontario, they went out there and built big, like, logging corporations, but it didn't do anything. Like, people still didn't want to go live there. It's just the natural resources. Okay.
Today, the economic landscape of Northern Ontario further explains the population disparity. The region is known for industries like mining, forestry, and more recently, tourism.
Tourism.
But while these industries provide jobs...
Wait, tourism. Wait. That mining and forestry, okay, but tourism, that means people are going to Northern Ontario. Is there, like, some cool stuff out there as well that we're not talking about? So people don't want to live there, or Canadians don't live there, really, except for 2% of the population. But there's a decent amount of tourism? Oh, there's some cool stuff going on there, though.
They don't offer the same diversity of employment opportunities that cities in Southern Ontario do. Southern
Right.
cities like Toronto, Ottawa, and Hamilton have diverse economies with growing industries in tech, healthcare,
Right.
education, and various other sectors that attract a broad range of people, from young professionals to immigrants seeking better jobs and living conditions.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's just like a win more situation. Because Southern Ontario has so much going for it, it has Toronto and other places with huge booming societies, they're going to continue to win. They're going to continue to grow and be like the places that people want to go to because they're already the winner. So they're kind of just going to win more over poor Northern Ontario.
And of course, there are a range of geographic and environmental factors that make Northern Ontario a difficult place for mass settlement.
You know, what's cool though is if you do live in Northern Ontario and you can survive there, you have the means and the will, you probably get like a lot of privacy, probably like pretty cheap like place to buy a home or land, I would imagine, if it's not in demand. So if you're into that kind of life, it's probably amazing to live there.
The area is part of the Canadian Shield, a rocky, mineral-rich
Right.
plateau with poor soil for agriculture.
I didn't know that Quebec was all up in this Canadian Shield as well.
The climate is also a significant factor. Winters are long and harsh, while summers are short and mild, which deters many from making the north their home.
Right.
Furthermore, the
That's why a lot of Canadians like don't live north in general, just to get away from that winter right now.
vast distances and limited transportation infrastructure make travel and trade more challenging than in one of the more densely populated southern regions.
Yes.
Lastly, there's an element
Yes.
of
Oh man, if you lived in Northern Ontario, imagine you couldn't get your Amazon packages as quick. Forget it. You know, I said some nice things about Northern Ontario, like, maybe it's not so bad. They can't deliver your Amazon Prime packages as fast. Forget it. Nope. No wonder no one lives there. Gosh.
population inertia. People tend to live where people have lived. The population centers that
Right.
exist today are often the result of a long history of settlement,
Right.
economic activity, and social development. It's hard to shift that momentum in a significant way without equally significant incentives or changes in circumstances.
Yeah.
For this region specifically, Toronto has become all consuming in terms of population growth and momentum, leaving
It's not even like a good or bad thing. It's just like it is what it is. Like, okay, Northern Ontario is more like useful for extracting minerals and wood and logging and for other industries to work there. And for some people, it's a cool place to live, like where you're not going to be bothered. And it is what it is. Yeah. So I think that's fine.
little for other cities within northern Ontario. Today, Canada's empty belt is home to just 3 cities with populations larger than 50,000 people. In the
Wow.
southeast, closer to Canada's Golden Horseshoe but not part of it, lies Greater Sudbury with about 170,000 people.
Okay.
This is followed by Thunder Bay in the western half of Ontario with about 120,000 people. Sault Ste. Marie is home to about 75,000 people and exists on the border across from Michigan's Upper Peninsula on the St. Mary's River.
Oh, okay. I haven't even heard of a lot of these places. But funny enough, a lot of Northern Ontario's biggest cities are in the southern part of it.
And if you haven't noticed, all 3 of these major cities are pretty far south, and that's due, in large part, to the Canadian Shield.
Yeah. The shield, this freaking shield.
The Canadian Shield, an expansive geologic formation that covers nearly half of Canada's landmass, is a
Wow.
defining feature of the country's geography and has had a profound influence on its development.
Yeah, I remember learning about this Canadian shield, which I thought was like Canadians going into battle with the Spartans with your shield, you know? No. It's it's rocks and minerals. It literally takes up maybe more than half of Canada. Like it's significant.
Composed mainly of Precambrian rock, the shield stretches from the Arctic Ocean in the north to the Great Lakes in the south, from
Wow.
Labrador in the east to Saskatchewan in the west. It's rich in
Wow.
minerals like nickel, gold, silver, and copper, but
Oh.
its rocky terrain and poor soil make it a terrible place for agriculture. Due to
Oh, wow. So, I mean, this Canadian shield. Let me go back. I mean, for many of the eastern provinces, like the shield takes up the entire area, and yet people live there. So it makes it more difficult, but not impossible to live on it.
but its rocky terrain and poor soil make it a terrible place for agriculture. Due
Okay.
to the lack of agriculture, the mining industry, spurred by the discovery of precious minerals, became a cornerstone of economic activity in northern Ontario. Towns sprang
Right.
up around mines, and the minerals extracted became valuable exports. This pattern of resource extraction has been both a boon and a challenge. While it provides jobs
Okay.
and revenue, it also subjects local economies to the boom and bust cycles inherent in resource dependent industries. In terms
Sure.
of environmental impact, the Canadian Shield is a significant carbon sink, with its vast boreal forests
Ah.
playing a critical role in the global carbon cycle. However, the
Wow. I had no idea about how significant the Canadian shield was, how significant Northern Ontario was to these specific industries in Canada.
exploitation of mineral resources poses environmental challenges, including habitat destruction and water pollution, which
Oh.
have long term implications for this delicate ecosystem. This is
Ah.
also the same type of boreal forest that endured incredibly destructive wildfires in 2023, which
Oh, right. Yes, I did learn about these wildfires. And a lot of this area is forest. Okay, now I see.
makes northern Ontario particularly susceptible to this in the future. Despite its harshness
Ah,
and relative inaccessibility, the Canadian Shield is deeply woven into the national identity of Canada. It's a
really?
landscape that has inspired artists, writers, and musicians.
I did, yeah. I remember hearing this word, Canadian Shield. I didn't realize how significant it was, or learn this deeply about it. This is actually really interesting. People have what? Painted pictures of this, or written songs and poems about the Canadian Shield?
Capturing the imagination with its untamed beauty. At the same
Wow.
time, its natural resources have been instrumental in shaping the economic landscape of the country.
Right.
Canada's empty belt is home to very few people, and the ones that do live there live almost as far south as they possibly can.
Ah,
Despite this region of Canada still offers a bounty of natural resources, minerals, and forests that will inevitably be instrumental in the global fight to reverse climate change. I hope you enjoyed learning.
wow. I did enjoy that. That was really informative. What the heck? This was by Geography by Geoff. And I got to give that a like. I enjoyed that. I mean, again, I stumbled on this topic and it was just kind of random to me from my little American point of view. Like, oh, very few Canadians live in this gigantic area in central Canada. And I was like, what? Since when? Well, apparently since a long time ago, because it's been determined by literally the landscape and geography and history. But I was hoping this would be a pretty interesting, and I thought it was. I learned quite a few things about Canadian population, like in geography, and yeah, and that Canadian shield. I enjoyed this quite a bit. Anyway, if you enjoyed this as well, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada and Canadian culture, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching and see you next time.